says is that, you know, what he says is that I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to the kitchen to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh, I eat well, and I grow strong. Tomorrow, I'll be at the table when company comes, and nobody dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too sing America. And so what I wanted to do just to sort of bring this, you know, this poem here to say that this is this idea, right? That America is this idea as well as a physical place. I wanted to also highlight, for example, the colors that's in this black, you know, red, black, and green. This comes from Marcus Garvey, who was an immigrant to America, who basically gave the discourse, right, for African Americans, particularly seeing themselves in a diaspora. And so the red stands for blood, the black for the people, and the green for the land, right? Because he even had a Back to Africa movement. But I wanted to share that to you because in essence, what Garvey issues in is a nationalism that have always been in America. Let it be, you can look at Frederick Douglass, you can look at, you know, folks like Sojourner Truth, and they basically invoked that they too sung America. Okay. And so again, my favorite parts of this is I laugh, I eat well, and grow strong. Right? So in essence, you have to have a level when you're now dealing with, in the next slide, you're going to see what I'm going to sort of show you by the numbers. And what happens is that you have to have some level of, you know, humanity, but then also how do you eke out and make out a space? And then how do you keep your song? And how do you keep, right? Yes, you know, how do you keep your spirit? I want to go back a slide here. Let me go back.
Can I just say one thing real quick?
Yes.
It's very interesting to me that you're saying that when you're showing that poem about how this individual wants America to see them, and we're talking about Black Lives Matter trying to be seen, individuals trying to be seen and trying to be heard when they feel like they've been disenfranchised.
And that in that, you know, Connor, is so important to understand. And one of the songs that I actually like, and I'm going to, you know, I did try to call myself and stealing it in here, but I see that that's not how that's going. And so what happens is that, so let me tell you a song that I really like that really gets into how movements work and how people are being seen. And so one of those songs is basically emerges, you know, during the period of right after slavery. And it's a song called, well, some people say it was even in slavery, Wade in the Water. And so right now I'm going to, you know, tell you as we move forward in the presentation, I want to tell you that we're now in some water. So wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. Tonya's about to trouble the water. I'm about to trouble some water. I'm about to hit the idea of an interrogate here. Okay?
Love it.
I'm about to interrogate. And it's going to be, again, this idea of being able to reach and expand, right? All right, so let's look at things by the numbers, okay? Let's look at by the numbers. And so by the numbers, it works this way. So Jamestown, Virginia was a colony that was formed in 1607. Right? And again, tobacco would be king until cotton came along. And so when we're talking about the origins of the United States, we're looking at really Jamestown, Virginia. And so also we have the Declaration of Independence is passed in 1776. And so basically when we look at British North America, right, it was set for a colony. It was a colony for roughly 169 years, right? So you go from 1607 to 1776. And so then we have this American Revolution that starts in 1775, which lasts until 1783. We have a constitutional convention that basically goes from 1787 until then it's ratified in 1788, and then it's effective in 1789. So when we look at those dates, just by the numbers, America has theoretically enjoyed independence, liberty and freedom, right? As theoretically for 236 years. So how did you get the 236 years? The year we are in, 220, and then we're talking about, again, the end of the American Revolution, 1783, all right? So again, that's a story. But now I want us to look at this, and I'm going to say this slowly because I really want you to get this point. Now let's look at this in terms of Black folk, okay? So we are generally accept that even though Blacks came here is really with an ambiguous status in 1619, Blacks arrived in 1619, and that's the date that in Jamestown, Virginia, right? And again, that's before the settlement of Plymouth, but we're not going there. And as I pause here, I do want to say this. We were talking and I didn't forget in my heart, but I forgot in action. I do want to acknowledge, since we're talking about Jamestown, Virginia, and I want to acknowledge this, I do want to acknowledge that we are on Lenape land, that we are on indigenous people's land. And we should do more of that land acknowledgement. Because like Langston Hughes said, we have to tell these narratives. Okay? And I am acknowledging that in Chester County. So now let's look at this in terms of Black folks in enslavement. So Black people arrive, right? I do see a comment. I am trying to keep up with comments and talks that I actually can do that. I try to at least. Okay, go back. All right, so my mouse. So what happens is that we have that, Blacks come here at roughly 1619. Their status was ambiguous. The 13th Amendment abolishes slavery with the exception of crime in 1865. All right, so let's look at the numbers. From 1865 to 1916, from 1916, Blacks would stay in a state of oppression or slavery for 246 years. That's just taking from when Blacks come to America to when the formal slavery ends. Okay, again, with the exception of crime. All right, so then that's the first layer. So 246 years of slavery and oppression. And then the next piece, we need to add this layer on. So it was so much violence that was going on between 1865 and 1881 that the Chicago Tribune said, we're going to start to keep lynching totals and number totals. And so in 1882, we start to keep lynching stats. Okay, so add another layer. In Mississippi, they passed something called the Mississippi Plan, which basically, and still to this day, will prevent an African-American from winning a statewide position in Mississippi. I said still to this day. They right now fighting it, it's in the courts. So again, the Mississippi Plan, which was aimed to target the 15th Amendment, right, was this legal, disfranchisement, never mentioning the word race, right, but disfranchising Black folks. And the rest of the South would pick up that plan. And so that's when we'll go to the civil rights movements in the 1960s. Okay, so now add another layer to that. And now you have Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896. So that's that form of segregation, right? I mean, that's what Plessy versus Ferguson said. It says, separate but equal. But we know how that worked out. It wasn't equal at all. So now we end the civil rights movement really in 1968 with Martin Luther King, okay? So now let's look at these numbers. From 1968, from 1865, that's 103 years of formal jurisprudence that denied African Americans full citizenship in this nation. So when you combine 246 years of formalized slavery and then 103 years of formal jurisprudence, right? We're now looking at this nation has had more of a history of marginalizing and stigmatizing and demonizing and othering African Americans. Now, this is American history. This is not open to interpretation. These are just the numbers and what happened. We're not getting anecdotal. This is what happens. And so what I want us to do is that I want us to look at American history, and I want us to be real that law and culture determine values, ideas, and hierarchy. No other factor. So again, when we look at 236 years of independence from Great Britain, but then when we look at now this story of America and how it involves and how it engaged Blacks. Okay. Now, one of the things that I want to do, let me go back here though. For some reason, my mouse is, okay. So, because I want to see this comment. Okay. So now, one of the pieces here I want us to look at, I want us to have a framework. Okay. And so it was this cat that Black Lives Matter is disruptive. It's very disruptive. Okay. Now, what do you mean by being disruptive? Because what Black Lives Matter has done as a movement, it has now taken on something called a cultural hegemony. A cultural hegemony. And this is the ideology I want us to work from together. So the sociologists, and you can, look at this and there's articles about it, but as sociologist Nikki Lisa Cole of the University of York in England, she basically says that, cultural hegemony refers to a domination or rule maintained through ideological and cultural means. It is a way that, is usually achieved through social institutions, which allow those in power to strongly influence values, norms, ideas, expectations, worldview, and behaviors of the rest of society. So I'm going to say that again, that cultural hegemony refers to domination or rule maintained through ideological or cultural means. It is achieved through social institutions which allow those in power to strongly influence the values, norms, ideas, expectations, worldview, and the behavior of society. Now, I'm going to go back a slide. Go back to this slide here because I want to tell a story about really the first time that we had a disruption in this system involving Black people in slavery and oppression. Okay, so the disruption that really happens was, it was a group of folks, many of them in Pennsylvania, but in the surrounding areas, and they were a group of Quakers. So they were a group, the Religious Society of Friends, okay? And in that Religious Society of Friends, there was this disruption because what they end up doing was they said, okay, we're going to help freedom seekers, right, gain their freedom by assisting them on the Underground Railroad. Now, this becomes very important because really I'm looking at, we do know that people like Denmark Vesey, who of course, when we look at people who fight for freedom and they are enslaved, I mean, think about the American narrative. So you talk about, unexamined and, uninterrogated, non-interrogated narrative is that Denmark Vesey, someone who wanted freedom in a nation that actually fought for its freedom, right? He was considered a madman because, he didn't want to be a slave. Or how about Nat Turner? And the actions that came from someone like, who was, fighting for freedom, but he was seen as a madman, right? And then there was a cat by the name of Dred Scott, where actually he sued for his freedom. And he was told by the Supreme Court, Roger B. Taney, the decision was that not only was he a slave, but Black people had no rights that white people were bound to respect. Now that's a quote from that decision, one of the worst judicial decisions made. And so what happens is, and that was in 1857. And so now, but this group of Quakers, right, this allied with the Black initiative to put one foot in front of the other to gain their freedom. Because remember now, always remember that the first abolitionist is the Black person who ran away. Right? And so that's the first abolitionist. And so then people who helped them along the way, but then guess what? They were marginalized. They too were ran out. There was a very famous case about how it was a hall that was built called Pennsylvania Hall in Philadelphia, and it was burnt to the ground because people saw this idea of abolition in anti-slavery activities as threatening the American way. But what happens is that between 1850 and 1860, there was a series of events, including the activities of these abolitionists working with, again, white and Black abolitionists, working with freedom seekers. And what were they doing? They were pushing the narrative away from the hegemony, right? That slaves were happy, right? Number one. And then two, that this was just the way it was. They pushed that narrative. And it was their actions that helped to lead to the Civil War that finished the business of what happened in Philadelphia at this constitutional convention. So when you're looking at freedom seekers, these Black folks, right, who in essence, right, this put one foot in front of the other. We celebrate them now, Frederick Douglass, right, Harriet Tubman, Williams Well Brown, Henry Box Brown, right? We celebrate them, Harriet Jacobs. We celebrate them, but I want you to really understand what they said. In essence, when they put one foot in front of the other, they said Black Lives Matter. And then they had allies who said, yes, they do. And so what happens is they push that narrative. And so what happens is when they pushed it, they brought it, or they pushed it, or you can say they took it from obscurity and said, no, guess what? Now we have to debate this politically. And then it went to on the national platform. And when it got to the national platform, guess what happens? We are going to the American Civil War. So I don't want that to escape you, because again, you had coalition building in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s. And that coalition building and multiracial, ethnic, religion, crossing all types of grounds did what? It took a narrative from obscurity, something that the Constitution initially, why the Constitution, bans it's not the Constitution, 1807, where we have the banning of, international slave trade that just pushed, right, the domestic slave trade and smuggling. But for the most part, you took a group of people that took roughly about 20 years or so, but they forced an issue that was on the periphery, they brought it to the center. And so right now they became responsible or something that emerged. We had, of course, the 13th Amendment, but an amendment that's called the 14th Amendment, the Equal Rights Amendment, that everybody goes to. Because what it did was that it defined citizenship in this nation. So that's what coalition and movement looks like. Okay. And so when that's the first layer again, so when Blacks would get rid of one yoke, now you go into another piece. Again, I'm going to be mindful of our time. So I want us to go back to this ideology that's dealing with cultural hegemony. And what cultural hegemony does is that it makes people start to believe that, you know, they basically, the idea, the what comes to across in messaging and media is that they discuss the role of common sense. If people say, oh, this is just common sense. So these dominant about in the dominant ideas about society and our place in it, and it's in our and how cultural hegemony is created. Okay, so for example, the idea of pulling oneself up through the bootstraps. It's the idea that anyone can succeed economically if they just try hard enough. It's just a form of common sense. Now, let's look at this chart again. Okay, you can try to pull yourself up, but now you got legal jurisprudence that's creating not only a value system, it's creating ideas, and legally it's creating a hierarchy. So this idea of when Gramsci talks about how the elite, the ones who really, the bourbon class, as Martin Luther King would call them, right? And people would call them, how the elite, what it would do is that it would say, okay, if you just try hard enough, you can just thrive. And so therefore, capitalism, it just makes sense. It justifies this system. And so what happens is you have now a social structure that's basically built around this system of capital. And it fosters the belief that success in social mobility is the responsibility of an individual. And what it really does is obscures class, gender, and race inequalities that's built into the system. And then what happens is now gives us cultural narratives and imagery that, you know, again, that's all you have to do is do A, B, and C. But I just showed you jurisprudence is saying that, well, you couldn't go to certain schools. You couldn't stay in certain neighborhoods. And so the idea of cultural hegemony, right, sort of falls short, particularly when we're looking at all of the people in America. And so again, so the idea of Black Lives Matter, it disrupts this cultural hegemony in this era. Because every generation, right, must find its own language and lexicon to deal with its circumstances. So now there's a guy by the name of Paul Robeson. And I want to dedicate about 4 minutes. I'm hoping that this pulls up. If not, I'll just come out and we'll take a second and I'll go and pull it up on the internet. And so what I want you to hear, Paul Robeson now has been called. This man was one of the most famous African Americans throughout the world. He was called to testify at the House Un-Americans Activities Committee. He was educated. He was a lawyer. He was a part of Phi Beta Kappa. I mean, the man was just a bad brother. Okay. And so what ended up happening was that Paul Robeson gets called to the House. He was famous. He was beloved. He played he played in the role of Othello in Shakespeare's Othello. He played the role of Othello, and he became internationally famous. He would basically go and unite with workers throughout the world. So at first, Paul Robeson was beloved. In essence, I would say that he was the heir. It went like, in many ways, it was going this way. You had Frederick Douglass, who dies, and then Booker T. Washington, right, picks up the, sort of the flagship for Black leadership. And then the next person was Paul Robeson, And so what happens is that, again, he, enjoyed this stature, that was in, America. And so what I want to do is I want to take about 4 minutes because I want you to listen to how Paul Robeson defends his citizenship. And the reason I'm sharing this clip with you is because, in essence, again, Black Lives Matter is emerging from something. It's the latest iteration. But I want you to hear, now this is in 1957, and I want you to listen to what Paul Robeson says about, again, Black people and their space and their access, and their lack of access. So I hope to have it, put it in.
Now,
so I'm going to go to 3 minutes.
Mr. Robeson, now a member of the Communist
Would you like
Party.
to come to the ballot box?
Yes.
The Pennsylvania water?
That is right.
So now what happens is the guy who was over the House Un-Americans Activities Committee was actually from Pennsylvania. And I want you to see how Robeson takes him on. Again, this is 1956. So let's listen.
This committee has been instructed to perform this very distasteful task.
To whom am I talking?
You're speaking to the chairman of the committee.
Mr. Walter?
Yes.
The Pennsylvania water?
That is right.
Representative of the steel workers?
That is right.
And the coal mining workers?
That is right.
Not United States Steel by any chance. A great patriot.
That is right.
You are the author of the bills that are going to keep all kinds of decent people out of the country.
No, only your kind.
Colored people like myself. And you would let in the Teutonic Anglo-Saxon stock.
We are trying to make it easier to get rid of your kind, too.
You don't want any colored people to come in. Could I be allowed to read from my statement?
Will you just tell this committee, please, while under oath, Mr. Robeson, the communists who participated in the preparation of that statement?
Oh, please. The reason I'm here today, from the mouth of the State Department itself, is I should not be allowed to travel because I have struggled for the independence of the colonial peoples of Africa. The other reason I'm here today, again, from the State Department and from the record of the Court of Appeals, is that when I am abroad, I speak out against injustices against the Negro people in this land. That is why I'm here. I'm not being tried for whether I'm a communist. I'm being tried for fighting for the rights of my people, who are still second-class citizens in this country, in this United States of America. My mother was born in your state, and my mother was a Quaker. And my ancestors, in the time of Washington, baked bread for George Washington's troops when they crossed the Delaware. My father was a slave. I stand here struggling for the rights of my people to be full citizens in this country. And they are not. They are not in Mississippi. They are not in Montgomery, Alabama. They are not in Washington. They are nowhere. And that is why I am here today. You want to shut up every Negro who has the courage to stand up and fight for the rights of his people, for the rights of workers. And I have been on many a picket line for the steel workers too. And that is why I'm here today.
Would you tell us whether or not you know?
Okay, and so now what you see is that Paul Robeson, right, is now having this conversation that, again, when we sort of look at, and I mentioned some other people, let it be when Frederick Douglass was fighting against slavery, but even before Frederick Douglass, when we look at freedom fighters like Nat Turner, or freedom fighters like Denmark Vesey, again, an American understanding of freedom, right? Because Americans' understanding of freedom also always invokes a level of violence. Okay, and so what happens is that when now Paul Robeson, you heard how he invoked his citizenship, and he gave a story. He said, no, you're not gonna label me, right, a communist. I'm here fighting for the rights of my people to engage in this nation. And then he basically goes to his mother and his father, and then he situates him in the American narrative. He's not excluded on the outside. And then later on in his testimony, he basically says, they said, well, you know, why don't you go somewhere else? He said, because I'm here to stay. This is my country. And so now when we're looking at, right, Black Lives Matter, and again, I'm trying to stay within this time period, right? When we're looking at this conversation of Black Lives Matter, right? We're now seeing that it's an heir to a struggle of African Americans to basically exercise the rights that they had theoretically, but they weren't enforced. And then when they tried to practice them, they were excluded from that. And then what does that mean though? I want us to pause here and think about, what does that mean then when you see a brown body? How is that body then stigmatized? What does that body end up signaling when you got law that says where people cannot be? when you have a system that says it's okay to lynch and to kill with impunity. It's okay to give them substandard services. It's okay to marginalize them to certain neighborhoods. It's okay to economically starve them. So what culture and what value is that doing in a society? But then look at the beauty of it, is that even with going against that juggernaut, they kept coming and saying, we're gonna make this country live up to, right? Though that piece that's in that Declaration of Independence, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal with their inalienable rights for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And when it comes time and we need to, we will go against, right, a system that denies us that. And so again, you have this beautiful struggle that's really democratizing America. But it's democratizing America in a way in which the Blacks are on the periphery, getting and trying to be at the center. Now, Blacks are at the center in a way, in the sense that there is no such thing as Blackness. Well, excuse me, there's no such thing as whiteness without Blackness. So Black people are key to white people's identity. And I want us to pause to that, because in essence, right, Black serves two pieces. It gives that in that level of hierarchy, it allows whites not to be at the bottom, but it also, right, allows for an informal, a formal hierarchy, but whites think that they all have sort of access to the wealth, right? But in actuality, you know, they too are on the margins. And again, how do you define whiteness in America? Is normally, and I say whiteness, I'm talking about even the concept of the melting pot, where you have all the different ethnicities together, okay? And so again, Robeson, he goes and he challenges, again, this system here. And he says this piece that I want us to say, because of time, I won't go to the next segment that I was going to show you, but he says that, and I want you to think about it, people that we admire today. I mean, Frederick Douglass was still considered, he was a fugitive according to the law. So was Harriet Tubman. They were fugitives. But what they did was they're putting one foot in front of the other, forced a narrative. And so Paul Robeson says in this testimony that you can get from YouTube, he says that Frederick Douglass could be here today, Harriet Tubman could be here today. Then he mentions people like Eugene Debs can be here today. Okay, so being mindful of time. So I'm going to, being mindful of time and realizing that our time is really just really short together. I wanted to, again, go to share that. So that was in 1956 where Rob Robeson has, you know, takes this position and he says, look, you know, you're not going to make me indict myself or, you know, incriminate myself. And so at the very end of that, I love how that that testimony ends, is that they basically get so flustered because Paul Robeson did not bow, his back didn't break and his voice didn't tremor. And so basically they got so frustrated that they ended the hearings when he called them neo-fascist. And he said that they were the ones that were un-American. He was not. Now, isn't that something? So in this particular song here that I want us to listen to is I want us to listen to Nina Simone, because Nina Simone, basically, she has a song called Mississippi Goddamn. It was written after Medgar Evers was murdered. Right. And what I'm trying to show you again is this idea about this is in that Black Lives Matter is in the tradition of Black protest. Okay, it's not something that's new from those freedom seekers who were putting one foot in front of the other, to Ida B. Wells, who led an anti-lynching campaign that would help to start the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, from Marcus Garvey, who would introduce that, this idea that, Blacks were worthy of land, right, and ownership. And so then you have Paul Robeson defending his citizenship. And then now what Nina Simone does here is that she takes this, this Blacks are being murdered. And one person that was being murdered was, who got murdered that really helped her with this song was a Mississippian, Medgar Evers. He was helping people register to vote. And he knew that his life was in danger, but he didn't stop. And so what happens is that he had heard a speech, and I actually had that in here. He heard a speech by JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the president, and this speech basically had him to break his own protocol, and he ended up getting shot in the back in his driveway with shirts that said "Jim Crow must go." Now, isn't that something? And so then on top of that, right, he gets murdered. And so we have the March on Washington, which was, again, a protest movement from people who were, throughout Martin Luther King, And so what happens is that, and after they had that movement where Martin Luther King says, "I have a dream today," right? And all little Black children and little white children, and people were just feeling so happy. And every time we have that nostalgic moment in about a month from now, and then what happens is that that next month, 4 little girls were murdered in a church. And so Nina Simone in music really summarizes how, Black women would respond to this violence against Black bodies. Because remember, Black Lives Matter got started when 17-year-old Trayvon Martin was murdered by someone who is a fake security guard. And so they murdered him, and then his murder was acquitted. And that would really start the hashtag Black Lives Matter. So I want you to see, because in essence, how the 3 African-American women who started that organization, they were basically in that moment, just like Nina Simone was. And they stayed in that moment, and they created a movement. So let's look at what Miss Nina Simone does here. Being mindful of time is 7:52.
Mississippi, goddamn, it's our last tune. We had some request for it. Alabama's got me so upset. Tennessee made me lose my rest. And everybody knows about Mississippi gone down. Alabama's got me so upset. Tennessee made me lose my rest. Everybody knows about Mississippi gone down. Can't you see it? I know you can feel it. It's all in the air. I can't stand the pressure much longer. Somebody say a prayer. Alabama's got me so upset, and Governor Wallace has made me lose my rest. Everybody knows about Mississippi gone down. Hound dogs on my trail. School children sitting in jail. Black cat crossed my path. I think every day's gonna be my last. Lord have mercy on the land of mine. We all gonna get it in due time. I don't belong here. I don't belong there. I've even stopped believing in prayer. Don't tell me, I'll tell you. Me and my people just about do. I've been there, so I know they keep on saying, go slow. That's just the trouble. Washing the windows. Picking the cotton. We're just plain rotten. Too damn lazy. I think it's crazy. Where am I going? What am I doing? I don't know. Just try to do my very best. Stand up, be counted with all the rest. Everybody knows about Mississippi. Oh, damn. Picket lines, school boycotts. They try to say it's a communist plot. All I want is equality for my sister, my brother, my people, and me. You lied to me all these years. You told me to wash and clean my ears and talk real fine just like a lady, and you'd stop calling me Sister Sadie. But my country is full of lies. We all gonna die and die like flies. I don't trust nobody anymore. They keep on saying go slow. That's just the trouble. Desegregation, mass participation, unification, do things gradually, will bring more tragedy. Why don't you see it? Why don't you feel it? I don't know. You don't have to live next to me. Just give me my equality. Everybody knows about Alabama. Everybody knows about Mississippi. Everybody knows about Mississippi. God damn. That's it.
Now, as you can see, Nina Simone was saying, okay, look, look, can't you feel it? Now, I want you to be in this moment when she said, can't you feel it? Why can't you feel it? Right? So now let me tell you what ended up happening. It's a reason that you can't sort of feel it. And this is now where I want to put this at. So this is going to come like one of those Jesse Robinson hits, right? Satchel Paige hits, right? All right, Jackie Robinson and Satchel Paige here, right? Because in essence, what happens is after the civil rights movement, there was a backlash. And that backlash was ran by Ronald Reagan. Now that's going to end, I'll tell you now, Black Lives Matter is going to really kind of spring from really the actions of Ronald Reagan. So the Republicans that we have today are not the Republicans of Lincoln. They are the Republicans of Reagan. So now what do I mean by that? And again, it's a book that I want you all to check out. It's Alicia Garza's The Purpose of Power. And so what she said is that he ran, of course, well, we know this, that he ran on a slogan of government is not the solution, but the problem. It is the dominant idea of conservatives today. Ronald Reagan opposed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Fair Housing Act of 1986. He gutted the EEOC. He initially opposed Martin Luther King Day. It would eventually pass under him. But again, he initially opposed it. He supported apartheid. He ordered invasion of Grenada. He basically appointed conservative Blacks to dismantle civil rights, people like Pendleton for the Commission of Civil Rights and Clarence Thomas for the EEOC. And then he actually opposed the Equal Rights Amendment dealing with women. He halted progressive politics. He was a talented orator. He was a great communicator. He dog whistled anti-Black politics. See, what he was smart enough to do was never, it's like the Mississippi plan. You don't ever say Black, but you dog whistle Black. So he would use and introduce words into our lexicon: crack whores, crack queens, welfare queens, crack babies, Black thugs. He demonized the poor. And what he did was that he gave white men, he said, the reason that prosperity that you didn't have like we had right before the American Civil Rights Movement, the reason that that's gone is because all of these people, they're leeching off the system. And so what he did was he combined two elements. He combined what they call the moral majority, which was a religious right that basically had a Christian identity and said, okay, it was a certain type of Christian identity, and said, this is the way that things are supposed to work. This is the way that you're supposed to do pieces. This is the way that you're supposed to act. And then he also combined another segment of conservatism in America, which is this neoliberalism. And neoliberalism is a series of economic policies and school of thoughts that privatization, corporate subsidies, and tax breaks, right? That's the way to go. But oftentimes it actually marginalizes, the working class people. So these ideas about deregulation, right? What does deregulation actually mean? So therefore, Blacks who had these laws on the books, there was no enforcement, because if you deregulate, then there's no oversight. And with no oversight, then how do you know if there's any problems to even enforce what's going on? He increased military spending. One time he even fired a whole group of air traffic controllers, sound familiar, who disagreed with him. He basically, when we look at Vietnam veterans, when he first came to office, homelessness was on one level. It basically more than quadrupled before he left office. He froze minimum wage. He slashed Medicaid. He cut AIDS, right? And so somebody says that dog whistling, yes, Robert, is dog whistling is how you sort of get people to see things. How do you build cultural hegemony? Ronald Reagan built cultural hegemony for the conservative movement. He blended politics, again on religion, and then he blended with economics. And so right now we are in the legacy of Ronald Reagan. He had his war on drugs that basically did what? It basically gave mandatory sentencing. And guess what he turned around and did? You can even look at the disparity when you look at how people were sentenced under crack and cocaine. Crack was used by poor people, cocaine by the wealthy. In fact, crack was actually listed as in 1986 as the issue in time. So what Ronald Reagan did in his backlash against the civil rights movement was to create the conditions that further stigmatized Black bodies. And so therefore, when George Zimmerman saw Trayvon Martin that night, or when Darren Wilson saw Michael Brown, and he said, I see a green-eyed monster. He referred to him as a monster. Then therefore, it tapped into the value, the culture, the imagery, that backlash from 1980s of the civil rights movement, and creating this imagery about, look at these leeches on the system. Look at these women who are basically, coming out and having this ideology. Look at these gay people. In fact, in America at one time, we actually criminalized and basically cheered. Yes, and people don't want to say that, but people actually saw that people dying of HIV and AIDS, right? That somehow that was justification for their behavior. That's how strong this ideology was that got entrenched in our system. And so therefore, these people are now who had this cultural hegemony going into courtrooms, not only as judges, but jurors. Would say that Trayvon Martin shouldn't have had a hoodie. Not that, wow, if he had on a hoodie, what was going on? What was the situation? Why shouldn't he wear a hoodie? Why can't he wear? None of those questions. You don't interrogate that. You interrogate the actions of a dead person. So the jurors, the judges, the people in the courtrooms, guess what? They too were influenced by that cultural hegemony, telling people about welfare queens, crack whores, thugs, immigrants, and the like sort, and that they were under attack. Again, he privatized even internationally. He basically went to the monetary fund and told them, hey, look, if they don't privatize these poor nations, then guess what's going to happen? You deny them funds. And so therefore, yes, created fear. That's what he did, Sam, created a form of fear. And so, but I want you to know how that cultural hegemony worked. So when evidence is presented, when people are going into courtrooms, they're still having a certain perception, because not only do you have that 340 years plus, but then you have now someone who's the top of the land creating policies, jurisprudence, legislation that's criminalizing that body. All right. And so, yes, it could be that Southern, yeah, part of it is Southern strategy all day long. So Nixon, again, and even some of Carter got, you know, can be hit for this, but Ronald Reagan would really just fine tune it. Okay.
I was looking at that chat and I saw the individual mentioned, Robert mentioned the Southern strategy. It's also interesting how you're talking about Reagan, but how we have had presidents in the past like Lincoln, or not Lincoln, Nixon, who have called themselves the law and order president and used fear to continue this narrative of the dangers of human beings.
Exactly. And that's what one of the pieces that I want you all to take away tonight is that, so when you create this cultural hegemony, people are not checking their attitudes and their perceptions at doors. You know, for the most part, long before Donald Trump, guess what Wells Fargo had to do? They apologized because they gave higher interest rates to African Americans. That's on record. Yo, that's on record. People looking at folks on paper, determining what their credibility is. That's because you got, again, the cultural hegemony and who's creating the discourse. So now let's look at this in 2 minutes. Oops, watch on YouTube. Sorry.
It exists because of this.
We don't have a video.
You shot 4 bullets into him, sir. He was just getting his license and registration, sir.
Which give rise to this.
Can you all see that?
No, I don't see a video.
Hold on.
I can hear it. I can hear the audio, no video.
But hold on, let me stop this right quick then, because I'll need for you to see this video. So it's only 2 minutes. So let me go back to that. Thank you, Gabriel. I love the fact. So let me go and now screen share it from this angle. So you should be able to see it now. So let's start. So let's look at this 2 minute and 2.5 minutes about Black Lives Matter.
It exists because of this. And this. And this.
You shot 4 bullets into him, sir. He was just getting his license and registration, sir.
Which give rise to this. Black Lives Matter is a hashtag, a rallying cry, a movement, and it lies directly at the intersection of race relations and deadly force in America. So here's the situation. The US government doesn't keep an official count of shootings by law enforcement, but an ongoing Washington Post tally identified 990 fatal shootings by law enforcement in 2015. Of the 93 unarmed civilians killed by police in these cases, more than 40% were Black, despite the fact that Black people make up 13% of the nation's population. In 1992, when Los Angeles police officers were acquitted over the beating of Black cab driver Rodney King, there was anger, there were riots, but there was no movement. Today, the difference is social media. But how did this movement start? In 2012, Trayvon Martin was gunned down by George Zimmerman, who wasn't a cop, but a neighborhood watch volunteer who claimed he shot Martin in self-defense. After Zimmerman's acquittal in 2013, the phrase Black Lives Matter debuted as a hashtag on Twitter and had signs on protest rallies around the nation. It reemerged in a big way a year later, when Michael Brown was shot by Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson, and a protest freedom ride to Ferguson took place under the Black Lives Matter banner. More than 500 people from 18 cities attended, and in August of 20...
I want to pause there because, again, they called it a Black Lives Matter freedom rides. Again, signaling and nodding, right? To the 60s. Something new. Every generation has to figure out its own language and movement. but they did give a nod to the freedom rider. I mean, they called this Black Lives Matter freedom rides. I didn't want that to escape you.
2014, the hashtag Black Lives Matter was used more than 52,000 times. Now here's the argument. Especially following the shootings of police officers during a protest march in Dallas, the Black Lives Matter movement is spilling over to being an election issue, although not a clear-cut one. While Hillary Clinton is staunchly in favor of the Black Lives Matter movement, she hasn't impressed the movement's leaders. Protesters disrupted a Clinton speech at a private fundraiser, as well as a speech by her husband, former President Bill Clinton.
I love protesters, except when they won't let you answer.
On the other side, Donald Trump isn't favored much either.
You're going to hear it once. All lives matter.
Trump has been critical of the Black Lives Matter protesters and has said police are, quote, the most mistreated people in this country.
Okay, now we only have just a few more. I want to just take this out to bring back up my my presentation, and then I want us to go into a conversation. So let me exit the full screen right quick. All right, to bring me back on to the conversation here, and then we're going to wrap everything up, and I want us to, you know, have a conversation here. Okay, just a brief one because the time is going to the end, and so I'm sorry. So let's see what. All right, so. All right, so yes to Trayvon, but it's again much more. Yes to Mike Brown, but it's much more. And really what we look at with Black Lives Matter, it's about disruption. It's about breaking up that cultural hegemony. It's about letting people who are, of all walks of life be more freer in this society. Freer. And I say freer, and I'm coming off the screen with this to say, I say freer because freedom is a concept that is, my mouse is now tripping, but okay, there it is. Okay, so freer is a concept in which, we have people engaging and people being in discourse, and that includes all people. That include cis people, meaning people who identify, by their gender, by birth, right? And then people who are trans, women who want to not have children. I mean, just a whole slew of what the movement means. It includes that Black, that brown, that poor. And again, when we're looking at multi-ethnic, multiracial movements, that is a threat to the hegemony. That is a threat to the status quo, but it's needed to push the democratic, the democracy, the conversation about democratic and, full democracy for all. So now you have to engage in movement. It has to be collective. Look, this thing is not any type of movement. Black Lives Movement or any sustained movement is not for divas, influencers, faint-hearted, or those who are easily bruised. Their egos, because you're going to get your heart hurt. You're going to get your feelings hurt. Because again, part of it is that you're going to have to be stigmatized. You're going to have to be put under suspicion. And so therefore, you also have to be ready to look at the difference between power and empowerment. So power is the ability to not only impact your lives, but others. Empowerment is about your self-esteem. And unless you take empowerment and transform that to pieces that go into that jurisprudence, that goes into those boardrooms, that goes into those banks, and that's power. When you can take a piece of a pen and swipe and put your signature and change millions of lives. That's why there's always scenes when people do some, expansive legislation, they always have a group and it's a ceremony because it's about to change or at least look as if it's gonna disrupt that cultural hegemony. One thing about Black Lives Matter, I really appreciate it, is it's decentralized. So you now can't target one person. Let's just look at it. When Martin Luther King died, so did the movement. You kill the person, you kill the movement. When Huey P. Newton died, or when Fred Hampton was murdered, right? What happened? They killed the Black Panther Party. So what happens is what these organizers of Black Lives Matter has really done is they said, look, we want this decentralized and let it be determined by the folks in the areas that they live. And that's powerful. So they're not an organization of like decentralization where, you know, there's no hierarchy. No, what happens is they are a movement of leadership full folks. They just come to the floor based on their ability and talent. They believe in training. And let me just tell you something as they believe in as well. Hashtags don't make movements. Rosa Parks was not some tired Black woman. Her feet was tired and she was tired that day in Montgomery. Rosa Parks was only 42 years old, right? And Rosa Parks had been an activist in the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. She had basically investigated rapes throughout Alabama. She basically helped the Scottsboro boys. So she was an organizer. She was a trained organizer. She was involved in movement. So I'm saying this to say for those of who are interested in joining movements, right? It's not for the faint-hearted or just a one and done, or you post a post and then it goes viral and then you know, thinking that's going to sustain a movement. No, as you've seen by this lecture, we're talking about something that has been sustained for 346 years, right? You have this group of people who are a minority who've done what? They forced their conversations to America's front. They've taken from the center, from the periphery, and put themselves in part of that center by their activism. And thank you. So now if there are any questions, yes, Phil says, can they get a copy of the recording? I hope so, Phil, but hopefully there'll be some editing because but yes, so I'm hoping, you know, that to be the true. I'm thinking that's true, correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. All right, are there any?
I have a question for you. So first of all, thank you for that. That was amazing. You spoke throughout the lecture about controlling the narrative and how important that was to move forward. Do you think that because the BLM movement is decentralized, that it opens it up to someone trying to take back the narrative? That seems to happen often in the media, and there's nobody to speak up against the change in that narrative.
And they ran across that, and like they said, they're learning this piece with this decentralization, because remember that in many ways is an antithesis of American movement making too, because oftentimes there's always a leader at the forefront. But what American history have told them is that, but if you kill the leader, you're gonna kill the song. And sure. So what happens is what they do is that they, again, work on training. So Philadelphia's issues may be similar to like a Ferguson issues or St. Louis issues, but it also may be different from an Atlanta issue. So that's when the training really comes into place, right? And as long as they are articulating that, you know, the general message that all people, all Black lives matter, all Black lives. That includes, again, the whole gamut from girls to men to trans to all Black lives matter. So, you know, they're not necessarily formal, but I like what Alicia Giz said, that, you know, oftentimes people have had to tried to hijack their movement, but they basically kept the activism front and center. Like, look, we need to look at changing some structures in this, changing the systemic aspects of oppression that we're going against. So again, they're still figuring out how to work in decentralization. But the main piece is what they're really working on is this idea of training leaders at individual areas. So let me tell you what happened at Ferguson that I chuckle. So, you know, one of the two people that always go to stuff when Black stuff happened is Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton. Well, guess what happened what happened at Ferguson with Michael Brown? When those two people showed up, Black Lives Matter said, the folks on the ground said, we don't want you here. We want those people here. those young activists who are basically dealing with training and organization. I mean, again, when I say organizing, they're getting people, not only are they getting people out to vote, but again, they're looking at housing issues. So it's not just a matter of registering to vote. It's about, okay, how involved are you at these city council levels? How are you looking at the planning of your your community? And so really they are big on training. And again, teaching people to disrupt that cultural hegemony that Gramsci talks about so well and so beautifully. Okay, so Anthony writes me, Dr. Thames Taylor, how would you respond that this, Rosa Parks died poor, the difference between she and organizers of BLM, such as Garza, is hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars are in personal enrichment gained through activism. Okay, so again, that's one of the criticisms of Black Lives Matter, that people are saying that, well, they had, some of this stuff is, for their personal gain. And well, when you look at their narratives, it's just not true. I mean, these are folks who were in college being activists. Many of them are, again, training people, countless amount of hours. Now, the sad thing about Rosa Parks, because she did die, basically, with no money, is that was a part of the old regime. Right now, while Rosa Parks died with no money, no one is going to say that Jesse Jackson is poor. No one is going to say that Al Sharpton doesn't have money, right? And so again, that part of that old regime is really part of that gender politics too, that Black women are supposed to just always be the helpmeet in the mats that help people that walk on their backs. And so what they're, again, looking at with Black Lives Matter is that organization, it costs. And so earlier I brought up Ronald Reagan, and what Ronald Reagan and many of the folks did in the neoconservative movement and those who were in the religious movement is that they went to training, pretty much like those abolitionists did. They went to training, and guess what? You're not going to have a movement that doesn't have benefactors and folks with money to help sustain and help people travel and the like sort.
There was an earlier comment about how do we change the narrative from BML being conceived as violent. There was recently a report where I read that a study on all of the protests said that 93% of them were completely nonviolent. There was no problem. Yet there is this perception in the media that they're dangerous. There's going to be riots. What are your thoughts on either taking back that narrative or how that thought of violence can be taken out of, not connected to the movement?
I think that if we try to, I think that Black Lives Matter, if grassroots people try to go against the media, then that's a foolish attempt. Remember, Martin Luther King was hated on the eve of his death, right? I mean, Malcolm X was actually once the most hated man in America, but yet and still now he shows up on postal stamps. And so I say that to say that, when you now try to take away, when folks see you as a threat. So let me tell you what really changed Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter was not considered really an international movement until what? America witnessed the public lynching, or at least the public killing of George Floyd. And that wasn't really for Black America, because they already had the Sandra Bland's, the Tamir Rice, the Oscar Grant, and like sort beforehand. But when white America saw that video, right, now it's like, wait, look at this cultural piece. Look at this hegemony. What are we saying that we are supporting? And then that's what you saw this past summer. And so I say that to say that, again, movements are not free. They never have been. Martin Luther King was traveling. Somebody had to pay gas. In fact, Lorraine Hansberry, she would buy the wagon, the writer, the Black Pay Right, she would buy the station wagon that Cheney, Goodman, and Swarner would be found in, those civil rights workers, because she supported SNCC through the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee by buying vehicles. So again, movements are not in America, movements have to be sustained, number one. But then two, to try to go against the juggernaut of the media. I mean, for the most part, that's just something that it's almost impossible. So what you have to take is that, that's why I said this is not for the faint-hearted. You're going to be demonized. Martin Luther King was demonized, and now he's celebrated, right? And so as you can see what Nina Simone said, you're going to be called a communist, which is labeling to try to other you. So what happens is that Black Lives Matter really is not concerned about how the media treats them, because they already know that's just part and parcel of the course of building cultural hegemony. And so they are very critical with people like Don Lemon, who, again, I mean, what's his name? Yeah, Don Lemon, the one on CNN, I think that's his name. And so what happens is that, again, this level of sensationalism or spin cycle or, bites, but that's not really what they're into. What they're into is that, okay, the media is going to demonize. Okay. And then
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, go.
Do you think that the ability to have social takes back the narrative from the media? I mean, in the past, if someone was lynched, it would show up in the paper and then it would disappear and no one would have the ability of finding that information ever again. I can right now, while we're talking, Google George Floyd and find thousands of copies of his actual death happening on screen. Does that help the movement take control of this a bit?
Yeah, and again, social media was crucial. I mean, social media really, as you saw from that video, it really helped to change. I mean, you went outside of the story. And so now with, people are now been able to do WordPress. They're able to go in and, have their podcast. But as we see, how is corporations responding to that? I mean, how is the cultural hegemony responding to that? Now we're having all type of restrictions that's going to be coming on YouTube next month, again, because it's not so, YouTube is something that people could post to, but now they're going to be giving that more to corporates, right? Again, you have to do the advertisements that come through and the like sort. So again, social media, when it was not regulated, when it was deregulated, to use it here, right? But now again, seeing the power of that. And again, for people to post their own podcast and to post them and, to have their own forums, right? So the government saw that. And the cultural hegemony, the ones who control that. And they said, wait, we're going to have to change that up. So it's not a coincidence. I mean, just go back and look at it. It's not a coincidence that, after George Floyd, everybody had a diversity statement to come out to talk about Black Lives Matter. So think about it. When Trayvon Martin was murdered and his murderer was acquitted, Black Lives Matter was a communist plot, basically, that was supported by George Soros, right? And now it's like, wow, this is something that benefit America. One of the cutest things that I saw, if you want to Google this, is how you explain Black Lives Matter. Even Sesame Street had an act for kids. They explain Black Lives Matter to kids. So again, it's this conversation now that America is having, but I want us to see it akin to those abolitionists that basically brought something that was on the periphery. They brought it to the center, and they helped to sort of better, at least bring about conditions to create a freer America. But we do understand that we're in the infancy of Black people. So let me say this and say it slowly. We're in the infancy. We only 52 years of Black people having rights that they can exercise freely. That doesn't mean they don't go under attack like voter suppression, but we're only 52 years away from King's assassination. So we're in the infancy, you all, of basically America dealing with Black people with straight backs. Okay, so I see a question that says, okay, so I answered one from questions, and you said, Gabriel said, also after that, would you repeat what you said about the organizers being turned away or such? I didn't catch that completely. I don't know what that meant. Yeah, I mean, so I don't know which organizers were turned away. So, so could you write that in the question, Gabriel? I'm gonna take two more questions because we said that we were gonna end at 8:30 and I wanna respect your time. Robert said, what is your take on defund the police movement as it constantly used to those to oppose Black Lives Matter as a reason to dislike the movement as a whole? I know it is slightly off topic, but I'm really interested in your take on it. So, so Black Lives Matter is not about, getting rid of, safety. What happens is that, again, because the movement is decentralized, one of the pieces that they were saying was that really reallocate resources that goes to police officers. So if you take a case like in Oakland, California, where the school district has a police force in it, but they don't have single books for all the students. The students have to share books. So what they're talking about is that look at the resources that police officers have and maybe invest and invest that in the infrastructure of the people that the police are policing, and not about creating shot with a cop programs. Those are great programs for community building, but they're not changing things structurally. And so basically what they're saying is that take that money from, the allocations of that, right? And sort of, again, reimagine how we do policing. And then also giving that into the pieces that can bring systemic changes. All right. And then I see, how would you distinguish communist ideology from Black Lives Matter ideology? The piece about communists and Black Lives Matter, that's actually an excellent question. It's going to take me a while. So I'm going to nutshell you, and I'm going to tell you that you send me an email at ltaylor@wcupa.edu. ltaylor@wcupa.edu. So I'll just basically try to, nutshell it for you. So Black Lives Matter is an ideology that deals with, right, focusing on how Black bodies are policed and what they have access to. And in that regard, they're not really much different from giving power to people to govern themselves, or, people over profits, and that's a part of the, the communist philosophy. And so with that regard, they're really not much different, or there's not much difference on that. I think the crucial difference, though, if I had to sort of choose a different, or what really distinguished Black Lives Matter from communists, is that communists look at the economic system, whereas Blacks look at, again, how Black bodies are treated in public spaces. So one is really dealing with, more what's the engagement with that cultural hegemony based upon safety, right? And looking at the structure of police forces and, violence that Black folks face. Again, there's economic components of Black Lives Matter by, basically looking at the spaces that Black folks in and training them. And that's something they do have in common with, communists, it's this idea of training. But again, if I had to just say, if there was like a clear difference, that Black Lives Matter really focuses on looking at those resources and how Black bodies are being responded to, particularly by those that are actors of the state. I mean, of the, the local or the state government. And I say that, I mean, police forces. Thank you for helping me. Oh, thank you, John. Thank you. That's so nice. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you all. You all are so complimentary. And on that end, y'all, we're going to end. Oh, my goodness. Thank you all so much. Thank you. And again, if you want to stay, somebody said focuses on, yes. Gabriel said communists focus on more economic inequality, and Black Lives Matter focus on cultural and social. Yes, I'm going to tell you something. Thank you all so much. Thank you for joining us. And now I'm zipping up, and I'll let.
Well, Dr. T, thank you so much. That was absolutely wonderful. The presentation was fantastic, and I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with everybody here, but also myself. I always greatly enjoy having an opportunity to listen to you, learn from you, and speak with you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you, you all. And again, how would they get the recording when it comes out?
Lindsay, do you want to?
Sure. Once we have the recording, we will send it out to all the attendees here. It was wonderful being able to connect with you tonight, Dr. T. Thank you so much for having this conversation with us. It's been an an awesome opportunity. I've learned so much, and I was taking notes the whole time, actually. So thank you so much. We will make sure to get that recording out to everyone. It's definitely something I know I'm going to watch again. So thank you so much. You know, if everyone's interested in joining us for, you know, more events and such, I will be sending out an email at the end, just wrapping everything up, making sure you get that additional information, and making sure that we stay in touch so we can continue to have these conversations. So thank you so much, Dr. T. Thank you, Connor. Thank you to everyone that participated, that joined us, that asked questions. Like I said, please stay tuned, and we are hoping and looking forward to seeing everyone again soon. Thank you again. And I hope everyone has a wonderful night and has a happy holiday and a wonderful rest of the year.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Olivia. All right. Take care, you all. Take care.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.